Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The dim glow of late sunbeams filtered through blinds into the modest digs 4 male housemates shared, casting angular shadows across the threadbare carpet. A riot of raucous, youthful laughter erupts from the lounge, where 3 companions relaxed on a well-worn sofa, eyes transfixed on their reluctant friend, Malik, who stood before them in palpable trepidation.
"No chance. I'm not doing it,"
he asserted, resolute, his arms forming a protective barrier across his torso, a barricade against their raillery.
"Think of something else to make me do."
His comrade, Ryan, unfazed, grinned impishly, holding aloft a diaphanous sky-hued frock, its fabric adorned with a subtle arrangement of delicate roseate florets.
"You lost the wager, my friend. Embrace this assignment for an entire day."
Malik ran a hand through his short dark hair, mind racing for an escape route that didn't exist. The poker game had been his idea. How was he supposed to know that Douglas had spent 3 summers working at a casino? "This is ridiculous," Malik protested, eyeing the garment with suspicion.
"Where did you even get that?"
"My sister left it last time she visited." Gia, their 4th roommate, chimed in from the couch. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "It should fit you. You're not much broader in the shoulders than she is." "I have a presentation in communication studies tomorrow."
"Perfect timing."
Douglas clapped his hands together.
"Nothing in the rules says you get to pause the clock for class."
Malik's shoulders slumped in defeat. The rules of their apartment were sacred. Bets were binding. Dares were non-negotiable. And backing out meant dish duty for a month, plus laundry. With finals approaching, he couldn't afford to lose that time.
"Fine,"
he muttered, snatching the dress from Ryan's hands.
"You lost the wager, my friend. Starting after I change."
"And these," Gia added, producing a pair of white strappy sandals from behind a cushion. The complete look. Malik trudged to his bedroom, the sound of his roommate's laughter following him down the hall. The door clicked shut behind him, and he stared at the offending garment in his hands. The fabric was soft, almost silky, nothing like the stiff cotton of his usual t-shirts.
"This is insane,"
he muttered to himself, tugging off his shirt and jeans. The cool air raised goosebumps on his skin. For a moment, he stood in his boxers, contemplating his life choices and wondering where exactly he'd gone wrong. With a resigned sigh, he stepped into the dress, pulling it up over his hips. The zipper along the side proved tricky, but after some contortion, he managed to secure it. The dress fell to just above his knees, the bodice uncomfortably snug across his chest. Malik avoided the mirror, focusing instead on figuring out the sandals. They were a size too small, and his heels hung off the back, but he managed to fasten the little buckles. Taking a deep breath, he opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The fabric swished around his thighs, a foreign sensation that made him acutely aware of every movement.
Well, well, well,"
Ryan drawled as Malik shuffled back into the living room.
"Turn around. Let's see the full effect."
Heat crawled up Malik's neck as he made a reluctant pirouette. The roommates applauded, Douglas wolf whistling for good measure. "You know what?" Gia rose from the couch, head tilted thoughtfully. "Something's missing." She disappeared into her room, returning moments later with a small makeup bag. "Sit."
"That wasn't part of the deal,"
Malik protested, but found himself being pushed onto the couch anyway. "Consider it a bonus," she replied, uncapping a tube of mascara.
Close your eyes.
15 minutes later, Malik blinked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The person staring back was strange. Familiar features transformed by subtle makeup, mascara lengthening his already long lashes, a hint of blush warming his cheeks, and pale pink lip gloss making his mouth look fuller.
I look ridiculous,
he announced, returning to the living room. You look cute, Gia corrected, inspecting her handiwork. The dress matches your eyes. Malik had never considered his eyes anything special, just blue, but in the mirror they had seemed brighter, enhanced by the mascara and the dress's color.
Remember, 24 hours,
Douglas reminded him, checking his watch.
That puts us at 5:30 tomorrow, and you have to go about your normal routine. No hiding in your room. I have a study group at the library in an hour,
Malik said, hoping this revelation might earn him a reprieve.
Perfect,
Ryan grinned.
Your first public appearance.
The walk across campus was an exercise in mortification. Malik had never been more aware of his body, the swish of fabric against his legs, the pinch of the two small sandals, the breeze against parts of his skin, usually covered by denim. He hunched his shoulders, trying to make himself smaller as students turned to look. A group of guys from the rugby team passed, doing double takes. One opened his mouth, clearly preparing a comment, but something in Malik's glare must have discouraged him. The library loomed ahead, a 6-story monument to his impending humiliation. He paused at the entrance, considering texting his study partners to cancel, but the thought of the mounting assignments drove him forward. His study group occupied their usual table in the back corner of the 3rd floor. Amber looked up first, her expression shifting from welcome to confusion. Malik?
Lost a bet,
he said tersely, sliding into his usual chair and immediately opening his textbook.
Don't ask.
To their credit, the group recovered quickly. Priya snorted, but returned to her notes, while Jason gave him a thumbs up before continuing his explanation of fluid dynamics. Gradually, the initial awkwardness faded as they delved into their work. 2 hours later, Malik had almost forgotten what he was wearing until he stood to reach for a reference book and felt the dress flutter around his legs. The color really suits you, Amber commented as they packed up. Brings out your eyes.
Thanks,
Malik mumbled, unsure how to take the compliment. On the walk back to the apartment, the evening air cooled, raising goosebumps on his arms. He quickened his pace, thinking longingly of the sweatshirt hanging in his closet. But when he returned, the apartment was empty except for a note on the fridge. Gone for pizza. Back soon. P.S. Check your closet. Gia. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Malik opened his bedroom door. Hanging on the closet doorknob was a white cardigan. He touched the soft material, grateful for the thoughtful addition. Slipping it on, he felt instantly warmer and somehow less exposed. The apartment door banged open, his roommates returning with boxes of pizza and the scent of garlic bread. Nice cardigan, Douglas noticed immediately. Good addition.
Gia left it for me,
Malik explained, taking a slice of pepperoni. You actually look... Ryan tilted his head, studying him. Not half bad. I was expecting more comedy, less... whatever this is.
Please, enjoy my suffering,
Malik deadpanned, but the comment had caught him off guard. He hadn't expected any part of this experience to be described as not half bad. As the evening wore on, the initial discomfort began to fade. The dress, while still foreign, wasn't as restrictive as his jeans usually felt after a long day. The cardigan provided both warmth and a sense of security. By the time he retreated to his room to work on his presentation, he had almost stopped thinking about what he was wearing. Almost. Getting ready for bed posed a new dilemma. The rules stated 24 hours in the dress, but surely sleeping counted as a pause. He poked his head into the living room where his roommates were playing a video game. "Does the bet include sleeping in this thing?"
"Absolutely,"
Ryan confirmed, without looking away from the screen.
24 continuous hours.
With a sigh, Malik returned to his room. The dress would wrinkle terribly, and he couldn't imagine it would be comfortable to sleep in. After a moment's consideration, he slipped off the cardigan and sandals, but left the dress on, climbing under his covers and trying to find a position that didn't twist the fabric uncomfortably. Sleep came surprisingly easily, the day's stress melting away into dreams filled with colors and fabrics he couldn't quite remember upon waking. Morning light filtered through his blinds, rousing him from sleep. For a disoriented moment, he couldn't place the unfamiliar sensation against his skin. Then memory flooded back. The bet, the dress, 12 hours down, 12 to go. The dress had ridden up during the night, twisted around his waist. He straightened it, noting the wrinkles that now marred the previously smooth fabric. His communication studies presentation wasn't until 2 p.m., which gave him time to figure out how to look somewhat presentable. A shower posed its own challenges. After deliberation, he decided to keep the dress on the hook outside the shower curtain, standing shivering on the bath mat as he quickly dried off before slipping it back on. The wrinkles were slightly improved by the steam, though far from perfect. Back in his room, he stared into his closet, wondering what one wore over a light blue sundress for a class presentation. The white cardigan seemed the only reasonable option, though the combination was decidedly casual for public speaking. A knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. "Decent?" Gia's voice called.
"As decent as possible, given the circumstances,"
he replied. She entered, carrying a small iron and a spray bottle. "Thought you might need this. The dress looks like you slept in it."
"I did sleep in it,"
he reminded her.
"As per the rules."
"Well, let's fix it up. Take it off for a minute. I'll press it."
"I'm not sure that's allowed."
Malik frowned. "Bathroom breaks are allowed, right? Consider this dress maintenance. The bet was to wear it for 24 hours, not to look like a wrinkled mess." He couldn't argue with that logic. Stepping into the bathroom, he removed the dress and passed it to her through a crack in the door, wrapping a towel around his waist while he waited. 5 minutes later, she handed back the dress, now smooth and smelling faintly of lavender.
"Thanks,"
he said, genuinely appreciative as he slipped it back on.
"I have a presentation today."
"I know. That's why I thought you might want this too." She held out a thin belt in a warm brown leather. "It'll make the outfit look more intentional, like one of those, what do they call it? Gender-bendy fashion statements."
"Gender-bendy,"
he repeated, uncertain. "You know what I mean," she waved dismissively. "It'll look cool, trust me." Dubiously, he took the belt, cinching it around the dress's waist. To his surprise, it did transform the look, giving it structure and purpose that had been missing before.
"See?
Sharp." She nodded approvingly. "Now, want me to touch up the makeup?" Malik hesitated. The makeup wasn't part of the original bet, and he'd washed it off during his shower without a second thought. But something about the way the belt had transformed the dress made him curious.
Nothing crazy, he stipulated. Just subtle.
15 minutes later, he surveyed the results in the bathroom mirror. Gia had a lighter touch than the previous day, just enough mascara to darken his lashes, a hint of tinted lip balm, and something that made his cheekbones more pronounced.
What did you do here?
He asked, touching his cheek. Contour, she explained. Brings out the angles of your face. His face had never been particularly angular, roundish, if anything, but in the mirror, he could see what she meant. The makeup enhanced rather than masked, bringing attention to features he'd never considered notable. The walk to his first class was less traumatic than the previous evening's library expedition. Perhaps it was the belt making the outfit look intentional, or maybe it was simply that he'd had time to adjust to the feeling of the dress, but he found himself walking with his shoulders back, head high. There were still stairs, of course. A sundress and cardigan on a broad-shouldered student who usually wore jeans and hoodies was bound to attract attention, but the comments he overheard were more curious than mocking.
Bold choice.
Statement outfit. That color really works. His calculus professor raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Malik took his usual seat. The class proceeded normally, the differential equations on the board just as challenging in a dress as they had been in jeans. By the time he headed to the campus center for lunch, Malik had developed a new awareness of his body and movement. The dress required different considerations. Sitting required more care. Walking had a different rhythm. The breeze against his legs was still startling, but no longer unpleasant. "Malik! Over here!" Amber waved from a table where she sat with several other students from their communication studies class. He hesitated, tray in hand, before making his way over. "Still with the dress?" she asked as he sat down.
24-hour bet,
he explained, unwrapping his sandwich. "Ends at 5:30 today." "It's a vibe," commented a girl he recognized from class, Zoe. "Very gender-fluid fashion week." "The belt makes it," another classmate added. "Pulls the whole look together." Malik found himself relaxing as conversation flowed around him, the dress becoming incidental rather than the focus. By the time they were heading to class, he was engaged in a debate about their professor's grading rubric, the fabric swishing around his legs, now a familiar sensation. The classroom was arranged in a semicircle facing a podium. Malik took his place in line as the presentations began, reviewing his notes one last time. When his name was called, he approached the front of the room with measured steps, conscious of how the dress moved with him.
"Good afternoon,"
he began, voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach.
"Today I'll be analyzing the rhetorical strategies employed in marketing campaigns, targeting different gender demographics."
The irony of his outfit paired with his topic wasn't lost on the class, earning him an engaged audience from the start. As he moved through his slides, he found himself incorporating his current experience, drawing parallels between traditional gender-coded advertising and the reactions he'd received throughout the day.
"In conclusion,"
he wrapped up,
"our perception of gendered products is heavily influenced by social context, rather than inherent preferences.
The discomfort we feel when these boundaries are crossed reveals more about our cultural conditioning than any natural division of tastes." The applause was enthusiastic, his professor nodding approvingly.
"Excellent analysis, Malik. Your personal experiment certainly added a compelling dimension to your presentation. A-."
Walking back to his seat, he caught Amber giving him a thumbs up. The rest of the presentations passed in a blur, his mind still buzzing from the unexpected success of his own. After class, several students approached him with follow-up questions, engaging with his ideas rather than commenting on his attire. By the time he checked his watch, It was nearly 4:30, just an hour left in his 24-hour challenge. The walk back to the apartment felt different from his reluctant departure the previous day. The late afternoon sun was warm on his face, the light breeze pleasant against his skin. He found himself taking a longer route, in no particular hurry to end the experience. His phone buzzed with a text from Ryan.
"Timer's almost up. Celebratory dinner when you're back to normal?"
Malik paused, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Back to normal. The phrase gave him pause, though he couldn't quite articulate why. He redirected his steps toward a coffee shop just off campus, wanting a moment to reflect before returning to the apartment and the inevitable return to jeans and t-shirts. The barista didn't bat an eye at his outfit, simply taking his order for an iced coffee and asking if he wanted room for cream. He settled at a corner table, watching the afternoon crowd while sipping his drink. A woman sat nearby, perhaps in her 30s, dressed in a professional blazer and jeans. She caught his eye and smiled.
"Great dress," she commented. "The blue brings out your eyes."
Thanks,
he replied, the response now coming naturally after a day of similar comments. "I wish more people would wear what makes them happy," she continued.
"Life's too short for fashion rules."
The simple observation lingered as he finished his coffee and began the final leg of his journey home. What makes them happy? He'd never considered clothing in terms of happiness before. Practicality, yes. Social acceptance, certainly. But happiness? The apartment was quiet when he returned, his roommates still in their late afternoon classes. He checked the time, 5:15. 15 minutes remaining in the challenge. Standing in his bedroom, he gazed at his reflection in the full-length mirror on the closet door. The person who looked back at him was simultaneously familiar and unknown. His face, but framed differently. His body, but presented in a new light. The light blue fabric complemented his eyes just as everyone had said, the belt defining a waist he hadn't realized he possessed. The white cardigan softened his shoulders, while the makeup Gia had applied highlighted features he'd never paid attention to before. For the first time, he really looked at himself. Not just a cursory glance to check that his clothes were clean or his hair reasonably neat, but a thorough examination. His legs, exposed by the dress, were shapely beneath the dark hair. His collarbone, visible at the dress's neckline, created an elegant line. His face, subtly enhanced by Gia's skillful makeup, looked more defined, his blue eyes more vivid. The apartment door banged open, the sound of his roommates' voices breaking his reverie.
"Malik? You back?"
Ryan called.
In my room,
He answered, tearing his gaze from the mirror. Footsteps approached, and his doorway filled with his 3 roommates, all wearing expectant grins.
5:28,
Douglas announced, checking his watch.
2 minutes to freedom. How does it feel to almost be done?
Malik opened his mouth to express relief, but found himself hesitating.
It was educational,
he said finally.
Educational?
Ryan snorted.
That's the best you've got? After we gave you this golden opportunity for personal growth?
actually, yeah.
Malik nodded slowly.
I learned a lot.
Like what? Gia leaned against the doorframe, curiosity in her eyes. Like how differently people treat you based on what you're wearing.
How clothing affects the way you move through the world. How color can change how people see your face.
He gestured to the dress.
This brought out my eyes, apparently. Multiple strangers felt compelled to tell me that today.
It does, Gia confirmed. The blue is perfect with your coloring.
Time's up,
Douglas declared, as his watch beeped.
Freedom at last. We're heading to Moe's for burgers to celebrate your return to masculinity. You coming?
Malik nodded.
Give me 15 minutes to change.
The roommates retreated, closing his door behind them. Malik stood motionless for several moments, listening to their voices fade toward the living room. With deliberate movements, he removed the cardigan, hanging it carefully on a hook. The belt followed, placed neatly on his dresser. His fingers found the zipper at the side of the dress, but instead of immediately pulling it down, he paused. For 24 hours, he had experienced the world differently, not just because people had reacted to him differently, but because he had felt different from the inside out. More aware of his body, more conscious of the space he occupied, more attuned to details he usually overlooked. Slowly, he unzipped the dress, letting it fall to the floor. He stepped out of it carefully, picking it up and smoothing the fabric before hanging it in his closet. The sandals were placed beneath it, paired neatly. He washed his face, watching as the subtle makeup disappeared, revealing his usual features, the same as always, and yet somehow changed in his perception. Pulling on jeans and a t-shirt, he felt the familiar fabric against his skin, but the sensation now registered differently, as if his nerves had been recalibrated. The denim felt heavier than he remembered, the cotton more restrictive across his shoulders. He rolled his neck, adjusting to the sensations. "Ready?" Gia asked when he emerged into the living room.
Yeah.
He nodded, grabbing his jacket from the hook by the door.
Let's go.
The walk to the burger place was filled with his roommates' chatter, recounting their favorite moments from his day in the dress. Malik participated with good humor, but part of his mind remained occupied with processing the experience.
Seriously, though,
Ryan said as they slid into a booth.
Mission accomplished, right? Most embarrassing dare survived.
It wasn't that embarrassing, actually, Malik admitted, studying the menu, though he already knew he wanted the mushroom Swiss burger. After the first couple hours, it was kind of interesting.
Interesting how?
Douglas raised an eyebrow. Malik struggled to articulate the feelings that had been building throughout the day.
It's hard to explain. It was like seeing yourself from a new angle, discovering parts of yourself you never noticed before.
Deep. Ryan nodded sagely, then ruined the effect by shoving a handful of fries into his mouth. The conversation moved on, but Malik found himself returning to that thought throughout the evening.
Seeing yourself from a new angle, discovering new parts of yourself.
Back at the apartment, as his roommates settled in for an evening of video games, Malik retreated to his room, ostensibly to catch up on reading for his political science class. Instead, he found himself opening his laptop and typing search terms he'd never considered before. Gender expression, clothing and identity, discovering gender. Hours later, with his roommates long since gone to bed, Malik sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by open browser tabs and a growing sense of understanding. The terms he was reading, gender fluid, non-binary, trans, weren't completely new to him, but he'd never considered them in relation to himself. He closed his laptop, mind whirling. One 24-hour experiment wasn't enough to draw life-altering conclusions. He knew that. But it had opened a door he hadn't known existed, revealing questions he now felt compelled to explore. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to its normal rhythm of classes, assignments, and the easy camaraderie of the apartment. The dress hung in Malik's closet, untouched but not forgotten. Finals approached, bringing the usual stress and late-night study sessions. The bet became a funny anecdote, referenced occasionally when the roommates reminisced about the semester's highlights. But for Malik, the experience had planted a seed that continued to grow quietly beneath the surface of his daily life. He found himself noticing details he'd previously overlooked, the way clothing shaped perception, the subtle signals of gender in everyday interactions, the assumptions people made based on appearance. One evening, as the semester wound down and the pressure of finals began to ease, Malik found himself alone in the apartment. His roommates had gone to a party, but he'd begged off, claiming fatigue. In truth, he'd been waiting for this opportunity. Standing before his closet, he reached past his usual hoodies and jeans to where the light blue dress hung. The fabric was soft beneath his fingers, familiar despite the weeks that had passed since he'd worn it. With careful movements, he removed his clothes and slipped the dress over his head. The zipper slid smoothly, the fabric settling around his body like a second skin. He added the belt, cinching it at his waist, and then the white cardigan, which had migrated to his side of the closet. In the bathroom, he rummaged through the drawer where Gia kept her rarely used makeup supplies. She'd shown him the basics that day: mascara, blush, lip gloss. He applied them with unpracticed hands, the results less polished than hers had been, but effective nonetheless. The face that looked back at him from the mirror was a revelation, not because it was so different from his usual appearance, but because of how right it felt. The blue of the dress brought out his eyes, just as everyone had said, the subtle makeup enhancing rather than masking his features. For the first time, he allowed himself to really see the person in the reflection, not Malik playing a role for a bet, but someone new emerging from within him, someone who had always been there, waiting for recognition. The truth settled over him like the soft fabric of the dress, comfortable, right, undeniable. This wasn't about losing a bet or wearing women's clothing. This was about discovering who he truly was beneath the layers of expectation and assumption he'd wrapped around himself. She, would need time to process this revelation, to understand all its implications. There would be conversations to have, explanations to give, adjustments to make. Not everything would be easy, but standing there in the quiet apartment, watching her reflection smile back with newfound recognition, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. The sense of finally solving a puzzle whose pieces had been scattered for years without her even knowing they existed. A key turned in the lock, her roommates returning earlier than expected. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the bathroom, ready to begin the first of many conversations. Ryan froze in the entryway, eyes widening.
Malik, what's with the dress? Did you lose another bet?
No, she said, voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. And I think I might need a different name now. Different name? Douglas's brow furrowed in confusion. The thing is, she continued, gathering courage with each word, that day in the dress wasn't just embarrassing or educational. It was clarifying, like putting on glasses and suddenly seeing clearly for the first time. Understanding dawned gradually on their faces, expressions shifting from confusion to surprise to thoughtful consideration. So you're saying, Gia began. I'm saying I'm transgender, she confirmed, the words both terrifying and liberating to speak aloud. I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of thinking. This feels right in a way nothing else ever has. Silence filled the apartment, stretching long enough that she began to worry. But then Gia stepped forward, wrapping her in a tight hug. You know what? Gia said, pulling back to look at her with a warm smile. That color really does bring out your eyes. She paused, head tilting questioningly.
So, this different name, what should we call you?
The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on understanding her identity that she hadn't gotten as far as choosing a new name. But looking down at the dress that had started this journey, at the auburn strands of hair that fell across her vision, the answer came naturally. Maya, she said, the name feeling right on her lips. I think I'm Maya.
Maya,
Ryan repeated, testing the sound. He nodded slowly.
It suits you. It really does.
Douglas agreed, recovering from his initial shock.
So, Maya, want to fill us in on how you figured all this out? Because I've got to say, when we came up with that bet, this was not the outcome I was expecting.
Maya laughed, tension easing from her shoulders as her roommates gathered around, faces open and curious rather than judgmental. The road ahead would have its challenges, she knew that, but in this moment, surrounded by acceptance and the simple rightness of being herself, Maya felt ready to face whatever came next. It's a long story, she said, settling onto the couch. But I guess it starts with a bet, a blue dress, and the strangest 24 hours that somehow turned out to be the most honest day of my life. The light blue dress with tiny pink flowers hung in Maya's closet for years afterward, not as a costume or a reminder of a bet, but as the key that had unlocked her true self, the beginning of a journey whose existence she'd never suspected until she felt that soft fabric against her skin and looked in the mirror to discover the person she was always meant to be.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!